Amid countless worlds that seem like pure fiction, lie battles, sacrifices, and secrets that have never been told. Every story is a war between destiny and choice. If you're ready to uncover heroes, villains, and the forgotten souls lost in between, then step into the world of Comic Recap, where every tale is a battle for survival.
In a time before time when all was all, and his infinite light lapped at the shores of nullification, existence knew of order, unified and uniform in all aspects, yet at the edges of perfection, stasis frayed and the dark womb of chaos brought. To him forth, their names are irrelevant, the force is primordial, their fundamentals unyielding. Anu Pame, Anoel Kus, Anor Fatmi, Satak. Ael is and is not the adversary and the all-maker. Myriad mantle of myth, all shine forth from the prism of mortal. Understanding yet, the source of the light remains the same, burdened by the half-truths of tattered messages carried by time, both fractured and fallible. The mortals of Nur struggle with the meanings of their existence. They are born of the gray, maybe mundus, the mundane, the tapestry of tales. That is the Elder Scrolls, a home where the infinite meets the finite, and the interplay of such forces makes for the stage of possibility. But upon that stage there must be actors, and one amongst them to drive the story of the world, the instigator, the insider, the character who kicks the boulder down the hill and sets the plot into motion. This is the missing god of the Elder Scrolls, the many-faced myth that through his actions strung mortals to the tethers of the finite and bound them to a place pressed into the fissures that form the borders of order and chaos. It is his heart that sustains the world, his actions that divide and provide course for the narratives of Nur. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Fudge Muppet. My name is Scott, and today I wish to take you through a full exploration of the missing god of the Elder Scrolls. You're most likely familiar with the name Lan, the Accursed, trickster of elven talls. Yet this is but one account of the figure. Central to the creation of Nur, for every culture there is a mythology, and each has their own form of the missing god. To the Yakans he is Sep, to the Khajiit he is Lage, to the Khajiit Silik he is Shazar, and to the Nords he is Shaw. But that is not all, and you must understand that these are not mere translations of name, but each has a rich mythology, unique to their own flavor of the monomyth. I suppose I should address his moniker of missing god. Why is he named so in most, but perhaps not all, of Tamal's myths about this divine figure? The stories of creation tell of his design or trick to make the world we know, yet it is also his sacrifice or punishment that robs him of agency, of consciousness. That is to say, in other words, he is dead as a god can be in this world, where the power of myth oft supersedes the defined material. I'll explain in greater detail the various cultural versions of this figure, but in most PA, Ian's Lan is rendered inert, after his scheme of creation. But why Lon? Or, that is to say, why the missing god? Why is he so important? Lon is the prime mover of everything in the Elder Scrolls. Every culture, every religion, every near apocalypse. Every component of Mundus relates back to Lan in some way. Even the very land upon which we walk, he is the personification of limitation and an age. Sons, soul of Padam, in every tale for different reasoning. It is he who takes the immortal and forces them into the cages of withering flesh and impermanent forms. He who sets the bounds of the heavens and the mundane, where spirits abar, from the unity of Athras in a reductive sense. How a singular culture feels about Lan, and how their myths regard him, define the fundamental nature of their religious beliefs. Terms have emerged in Newick and Paddock, derived from the fundamental forces Anu, order stasis, infinite, and Padam chaos, change limitation, which seek to divide. These cultures, with broad strokes, typically these definitions align with the humanoid Mary schism races of man, commonly believe the missing god figure to be a champion of their kind, a benevolent force involved in their creation men see themselves as figures molded by the gods. They relish in the world that has been made for them. Elves, on the other hand, commonly Aor, creation, they see themselves as descendants of gods, forced into flesh, forms reduced to procreation, to live in the filth and disgust of mortality. And they see the missing god figure to be a trickster, a devious force, a devil. And it is in the retribution of the elven gods that the terrible truth dawned. Oriel could not save Altmora the Elder, woman, and it was lost to men. They were chased south and east to Old Alina, and Lan was close behind. He shattered that land into many finely Trinimac Orel's greatest. Night knocked Lan down in front of his army and reached in with more. Then hands to take his heart, he was undone. The men dragged Lone's body away and swore blood, vengeance on the HS of Oriel, for all time. But when Trinimac and Oriel tried to destroy the heart of Lan, it laughed at them. It said, "This is the heart of the world, for one was made to satisfy the other." So Oriel fastened the thing to an arrow and let it fly along into the sea, where no aspect of the new world may ever find it. From this sea-swallowed heart emerged the Red Mountain, and the Isle of Venel in Morrowind, and this bleeding organ of Lan seeped its ore into the very land which crystallized into veins of pitch black, or which we call ebony. This, of course, is the site where the later DW civilization would discover the heart and begin their profane meddling, and where after the tribunal the not yet living gods of Morrowind attains their divinity, as the heart fastened to Orel's arrow sailed across the sky. It is said that a single droplet fell into the heartlands and it crystallized into the Kim El Adal, a gem which the Aid elves would use as the founding stone for their white gold tower itself, made in the image of the adamantine convention. This gem would later become the crowning piece of the Amulet of Kings, a symbol of worldly authority for millennia to come. Some even claim that NRU, a type of redstone abundant in the Kagor region, with magical properties in many applications, is sourced of Land's blood. I suppose it is possible you may too be familiar with the hearthstones flung from Red, Mountain's eruption in the Fourth Era, and the human-like ash spawn which form from them. These two are speculated by Neloth to be imbued with some vestige of power from the heart of Lan, and that these were the molten rocks that lay next to it for millennia. While Lan's influence is undeniable and seemingly outlasts his death, we will get into some of the theories and connection drawing in due time, Shireen Talos and the like. But first, I think it most fitting to dissect each of the cultural lenses through which the missing god is seen, in order to better understand the full music picture. I thought we should start with the anti-Lawan crowd, the Anuic, those that believe Mundus a prison, a denial of the divine, a cage which keeps them from the everlasting, ineffable light that is Anu. Collectively, cultures with this perspective hold views that see Lan as a malevolent actor, an upstart, a trickster, born of the darkness that is Padam. Typically, most cultures counted among the Anuic are elven. Yet not all the Red Guards are one of the most unique exceptions. Udon religion bears many fundamental similarities to the Aleri-derived faiths. Interesting that they both share a proposed island homeland that was lost and destroyed, one being Alaris and the other one being Yakuta. And there is also a focus among the Anuic on what was lost, and perhaps there may be an interesting lens to apply here, one of time. Orientation. You see, the Anuic are past-focused. They obsessed over what happened, what was lost, and that their greatness was behind them, which they try in some capacity to strive back to those glory days, something as fundamental as this. Whether a culture focuses on the past, present, or future can have a variety of changes in behavior and custom. It's going to be really interesting to look at the Picts, who I speculate are more future or present focused, regardless. We'll address those later. Let's begin with the most fundamental and foremost of the Anuic faiths, that of the Old Mary, of which the modern Old Mary religion and subsequent offshoots, like the Aids and the Elves, Deres Anu, encompassed, and encompasses all things so that he might know himself. He created Anuel, his soul, and the soul of all things. Anuel, as all souls, was given to self-reflection, and for this, he needed to differentiate between his forms, attributes, intellects. Thus was born Kus, who was the sum of all the limitations an Ul would utilize to ponder himself, an Ul who was the soul of all things, therefore became many things, and this interplay was and is the Orbis. The Orbis was turbulent and unruly, the unfiltered ruminations of Anuel made for poor design, and the other aspects of this place pleaded for order and form, and so Anuel made the soul of his soul, Oriel, and with his creation came the laws of time with newfound stability. The once ill-defined aspects could know their true natures, and thus was born the likes of Magnus Maralon, and Zenlon's nature was that of limitation, and in every aspect he would plant ideas based wholly on that concept, which, in essence, is to define and separate, to limit the bounds of one's identity, purpose, and place. He endeavored to create a soul for the Oris, a place where the aspects of aspects may be allowed to self-reflect. He convinced even Oriel to join his project when he was told that he would become king of the new world, and so they made Mundas, and the Adada, the original spirits, were tricked. Mundus was the house of Kus, containing far more limitations than not, and so was hardly a thing of Anu at all. Many of the ATA died off, and some, like Magnus and his followers, escaped, creating the sun and stars that allow for the limitless potential of magic to seep into creation. Some, like Iphai, transformed themselves into the earth, bones becoming the very forces of nature, so that the world might not die. The remaining would soon have to marry and have children just to last, and each generation was weaker than the prior, and then the Alma were born, mortals of the weakest souls. Lan made armies and named them men, and they brought Sithis to every quarter. Orel pleaded with Anu to take them back, but he had already filled their places with something else. But the soul of Anuel was gentler and granted Oriel his bow and shield so that he might save the Olda from the hordes of men. And while much was lost and the lands were fractured, Oriel with his followers were able to defeat Lan, take his heart, and hide it from the world. And so, the old mind continued in whatever refuges they could come. Teald Maris was lost in their mytha histories. The High Elves, also known as the Ultima, believe they are the purest descendants of the Alma, in both culture and lineage, a contested claim by the Mara, more commonly known as Sea Elves, but regardless of such contention, the Ulmen, to believe themselves the purest descendants of the original spirits, trapped here by Lan's evil schemes. The Dur, the Aid, the Falmer, and the Bosma, though there's some complication there, all have built their faith upon these underlying foundational principles. In essence, Lan equals bad guy who tricked us into a mortal prison. Lament the fall from godhood, and in action follow the path of Oriel and perform right action to find your way back to Aethorius. It is also from this train of thought, as some believe that the Thalor seek to unmake the world, a far more proactive and brutal approach to their philosophy. I briefly mentioned moments ago that there was some complication with the Bosma in regard to viewing them entirely as a Nuk. There are many traditional understandings that the Bosma are me-degenerated Alma, who devoted themselves to a forest, god, and most certainly in the political climate of the Illyri dominions of past and present. Aspects that unify elven lineages and faiths are most certainly pushed. However, there is a good argument to be made that these do not speak the truth of the Bosma people and their origins. However, at the same time, truths in the most material, a fact, wheel sense, are very hard to discern with the Bosma, as they rely upon the great metaphorical story traditions of the Spinners, a Bosmer priest class, to inform them of their past. That said, many of their tales speak of them forming from a kratos, primordial ooze, a chaotic shifting of forms with which their godify the earth bones sung into shape. It is also with a Phi that they maintain the green PCT, for in return, Phi allows them to keep their Bosar forms regardless of the fraying complexities of authentic Bosmar origins. Their view of Lan is very much the same as the old Merry Fates. However, their time orientation, so to say, is largely in the present as opposed to the past. The Bosma do not lament in the errors of the past, nor the evils of Lan, but instead focus on what they call the auric now, and they relish in the Garden of Valenwood. So if using the broad strokes of Anuic Vers Paddock, which solely relate to a perception of Lan, then it would be fair to say that they are Anuic, but atypically focused on the present as opposed to the tragedies of the past. But simply put, they do not long for a return to the spirit like the Alma do. Let's now speak of the races of man that could be considered Anuk. Also, just to reiterate, there is clearly a lot more to a culture than something as broad a descriptor as a Nuic or Pick. But again, at the essence of these terms, you can categorize cultures fundamentally by how they view the missing god figure. So for Yakins, they are one of the rare exceptions to the typical man-pick Ano correlations in their mythology. Satakal, the world skin, is the everything. The great serpent god, the world snake shaped like an Ouroboros that eats its own tail. Satakal is an equivalent fusion of Anu and Padam, and the serpent embodies the cyclical nature of the gray, maybe of the Orus. In the monomyth it says Satakal was the first serpent, the snake who came before, and all the worlds to come rested in the glimmer of its scales. But it was so big there was nothing but, and thus it was coiled around and around itself, and the worlds came to slide across each other, but none had room to breathe, or even be, and so the worlds called to something to save them, to let them out. But of course there was nothing out inside the first serpent, so aid had to come from inside it. This was Akul. The hungry stomach Ael made itself known, and Satak could only think about what it was, and it was the best. Hunger, so it ate and ate. Soon there was enough room to live in the worlds, and things began. These things were new, and they often made mistakes, for there was hardly time to practice being things before. So most things ended quickly, or were not good, or gave up on themselves. Some things were about to start, but they were eaten up as Satak got to that part of its body. This was a violent time. Pretty soon Akul caused Satak to bite its own heart, and that was the end. The hunger, though refused to stop, even in death. And so the first serpent shed its skin to begin anew. As the old world died, Satakal began, and when things realized this pattern, so did they realize what their part in it was. They began to take names like Rupa or Tuaka, and they stroll about looking for their kin as Satakal ate itself. Over and over the strongest spirits learned to bypass the cycle by moving at strange angles. They called this process the walkabout, a way of striding between the world skins. Rupa was so big that he was able to place the stars in the sky so that the weaker spirits might find their way easier. This practice became so easy for the spirits that it became a place called the Far Shores, a time of waiting until the next skin. You could easily classify these spirits who could survive the cycles of Satakal as the ET, the original spirits, as described in elven myth. It is important to define the Paddic element of Satakal here, Akal, by his hunger, for it is a hunger that proves to be the folly in Euron creation. The story goes Rupa was able to sire many children through the cycles, and so he became known as Tall Papa. He continued to place stars to map out the void for others, but after so many cycles there were almost too many spirits to help out. He made himself a helper from the detritus of past skins, and this was Sep or Second Serpent. Sep had much of the hungry stomach still left in him, multiple hungers from multiple skins. He was so hungry, he could not think straight. Sometimes he would just eat the spirits. He was supposed to help, but Tall Papa would always reach in and take them back out. Finally, tired of helping Tall Papa, Sep went and gathered the rest of the old skins and bowled them up, tricking spirits to help him, promising them this was how you reached the new world, by making one out of the old. These spirits loved this way of living, as it was easier, no more jumping from place to place. Many spirits joined. In believing this was good thinking. Tall Papa just shook his head. Pretty soon the spirits on the skin ball started to die, because they were very far from the real world of Sakar, and they found that it was too far to jump to the far shores. Now, the spirits that were left pleaded with Tall Papa to take them back, but Grim Rupa would not, and he told the spirits that they must learn new ways to follow the stars to the far shores. Now, if they could not, then they must live on through their children, which was not the same as before. Sep, however, needed more punishment, and so Tulpapa squashed the snake with a big stick. The hunger fell out of Sep's dead mouth and was the only thing left of the second serpent, while the rest of the new world was allowed to strive back to godhood. Sep could only slink around in a dead skin or swim about in the sky, a hungry void that jealously tried to eat the stars. I have a particular soft spot for Udan mythology. Sep is clearly the missing god, the Lan equivalent, who tricked other spirits into his creation, aka Mundas. There is even a cool interpretation of Rupa, aka Oriole, squashing Sep, aka Lan, with a big stick, aka the adamantine tower. Like, imagine the adamantine tower of convention being pushed down atop of serpent in the ground to kill it. It's clear to see that the Uden and Old Mary faith share many core similarities. Both view the missing god as a trickster who convinced other spirits to take part in creation, and both long for a return, turn to a higher plane as they believe they were once spirits who were forced to resort to creating children of flesh in order to live on the Almer, wish to return to Athras, to the ineffable light of Anu, and the Udans wish to return to the far shores in the real world of Sadal. Controversially, Breton could be described in some ways Anuic and Paddock, in others the missing god in their faith is Shor the bad man and source of all strife. Most theologians agree that he is a demonized version of the Nordic Shaw or Almeri Lan. However, there is evidence to suggest that this has not always been the case. There is a Manmer coupled idol found in Glenumbra that shows an elven woman of Nedic scaling, likely Mara, given similarities to other statues found, but she is in a lover's embrace, and some have even suggested that the lover is a man meant to be Lon. What makes this situation confusing is that the Braton have their origins as Nedic tribes of Hiero, who were conquered by the Almeri-derived Derry clan, and there has been a clear mingling of faiths. Elven influences would paint the missing god as a bad man, and the original needs likely the opposite. In the modern day, the Breton essentially revere the imperial 8 divines with some elven additions such as Finter, and I believe their view of creation to be a positive thing like the Imperials believe. But the lasting impact of elven influence has made a kind of man out of the shore figure, responsible for ills such as crop failure. One could even make the case that Shazar of the Imperial faith isn't directly identified by the Breton as the same as Shore. Ultimately, I would say Paddock, but I'm sure someone could make the case for a Nuck either way. Surprise, surprise, the half-man, half-mer race exists somewhere in the middle of the typical human Old Mary schism. But now it's time to talk about the Paddock. A little less whining and a little more gratefulness. These are the cultures whose fundamental view of Lon is positive, or at the very least, his creation of the mortal world is a good thing among the races of man most relish in the creation of the gods, or the very least understand its merit as a test of spiritual strength. And I think at the core of this belief is an understanding of the future, a preparation for a greater self. For the Nords, it may be to live an honorable and glorious life, so that they may fight beside or in great battles of the heavens to come, or for the Dunmer, it may be so that they should suffer through the trials of the world along the path of Prom, the Sidric endeavor, so that they may ascend to something greater. Pics are typically focused on the now and the future they are building towards something. Let's start with one of the most important divergences of faith in history, that of the VY that split from the Alma when the gods still walked. I'll try to stick to the barest bones of the tale in rel to Lan himself, but the story goes that the prophet Waith was an Ulmer of the Somerset Isles in the Moric era, but he was shown by Bia the triangle truth, and thus he acquired many followers, the VY, and they followed the rules of the Sijic endeavor, a path to transcendence, and at the core of their belief, they know that Lan, the frame maker, made Mundus as a trial, a test. There is a lovely passage in the book, The Changed Ones, that says this: of all the Ad who wandered, Ner Trinimac was the strongest. He, for a very long time, fooled the old Mary into thinking that tears were the best response to the sundering. They cried and shamed our ancestors, especially the feminine Ultima. They even took the missing god's name in vain, calling his narratives into question. So, one day, Boya, prince of plots, precocious youth, tricked Trinimac to go into his mouth. Boya talked like Trinimac for a while then, and gathered enough people to listen to him. Boya showed them the lies of the Athiadra, and told them Trinimac was the biggest liar of all. Saying all this with Trinimac's voice, Boya told the mass before him the triangle truth. He showed them with Mafala the rules of the Sijic endeavor. He taught them how to build houses and what they needed to bury in the corners. He demonstrated the right way to wear their skin. He performed the way to walk, to achieve an exodus. Then Boya relieved himself of Trinimac right there on the ground before them to prove all the things he said to a truth. It was easy then for his new people to become the changed ones better known as the Chimer. Then left Tomorrowwind, which was then known as Resane, where they would begin building the high Veloy civilization built around the precepts of Aura, Mafala, and Boya, the triangled truth. Ultimately, the core of this philosophy is that the missing god, Lan, bears truth and shows the Chimer and the path to transcendence through trial, as opposed to the Alma, who would wail and think tea is the best response to this grand test. Now, it is worth mentioning that the tribunal's arrival in the First Era changed things up, and the Orthodox religion shifted in many fundamental ways for an age, with only the Ashlanders really maintaining their original religion. But by the time of Skyrim in the Fourth ERA, with the death of the tribunal, the Dunmer have reverted to the way of their ancient ancestors, the music, Kaer. It is important to bring up that dominant faiths and beliefs can change over time, and such is the case with the Khajiit. In the 311th year of the Second Era, the main named Rid, Tharata, revealed the riddle, Thar, Epiphany. He brought peace to elsewhere, and his new faith of the two moons dance spread far and purged many facets of ancient Khajiit faith. This new faith in time would erode the theology of the Khajiit that had been practiced in different forms for thousands of years. However, many core facets remain just in different forms. But to really get to the heart of Kiji belief, we need to go back further. Unlike most religions, the Kaji don't make a clear distinction between the dry princes and the Audrey forces, rather grouping them all as simply spirits. For instance, Azura, for the Kaji, is one of the most central deities responsible for their forms, their ties to the moon sugar, and was deeply involved in the stage of creation. To give you a very reductive Kajic creation story, there was Fatmi, aka Pame, and Anur, aka Anu. They had two lids together and produced all the original spirits. Anur was done for. He thought more children would steal their happiness, yet Fatmi still wanted more. Children, with the help of Kathy, she tricked Anur to make her pregnant again, and she birthed more children. Yet, while birthing her last, Anur found her and was furious. He struck her, and she fled into the great darkness where she would birth the last of her elder, and his name was Laj, and here his heart was tainted with the great darkness, whose name was Namira. This taint caused Laj to trick his siblings and trap them within a new place, Munda's, and here his heart was torn in. Vengeance, yet the darkness within him, his dark heart, sustained him. LK stood in the doorway. He was broken and bleeding, and there was a hole in his chest, but the great darkness was still in his blood, and it filled the hole where his heart had been. The dark mass beat like a heart, and black blood spilled out onto the threshold. Aura heard each beat of the heart like the beating of a drum, and each drop of blood tapped to form a rhythm she felt in her tail. But Fatmi had taught Aura the names of all the spirits, so she recognized the great darkness for what it was, and she roared in time with the song, Era Namir, Ura and Aura tore out the dark heart of Lage, and all of the darkness in him came with it, and she cast it beyond the sea. From the dark heart of Lage was born the moon beast, the first of the draw, who lurks at the edges of the lattice and knows nothing but hunger, and with the darkness bled from him, Aura could see her mother in Lage, and she held him until he died. Aura burned what remained of his body before the gate, lighting the fire with lanterns of love and mercy. She wept for her brother Lage, and her tears fell upon the pile as the ashes of Lash scattered across the prylish lattice. Even the moon beast became silent for a time. Then Azura dried her eyes and at last went on to the world. Her time of grieving was over, and Fatmi had given her much to do. Lodge in early. Khajiit mythology is a complex figure, a character of tragedy. There is grief in this tale, and they do not look upon him as a devil incarnate, but rather due to the circumstances of his birth, he was corrupted and forced to do terrible things. Azura cleansed him in the end, tore the darkness from within him, and Laj was grieved. Even the moon beast, the darkness born within him, is not identified directly with Laj in Khajiit mythology. but instead held responsible for his wrongdoings. In essence, it is Nemera, the great darkness, that is hated. So while the tale follows the Anuic playbook, trapped spirits in Mundus, and the like, there is a distinctive, redemptive element. Ner forgave him, for she had a place we could make children, and those children relish in their homes. It ultimately sounds picked to me yet again. The distinction is not as black and white as it would be considered with the other groups, namely the groups of men after playing Skyrim many times. I'm very sure you would be familiar with Somgard in the halls of Shaw. Clearly, they have a positive view of the missing god figure. The easiest way to understand Nordic mythology is to view it as a reflection of the Elven mythology in many ways. They align an event just from a different side of the war. Even symbolically, Shor is associated with the animal totem of the fox, which itself is a creature aided with trickery, perhaps an unapologetic and righteous affirmation of Shaw's actions. In short, after creation at the dawn of the world, Shaw, aka Lan, was the chief of their pantheon, leading gods like K-Stun and Junal, as well as the armies of man against the Aelmeri gods in the War of the Dawn. Ultimately, Shaw was killed in the war, and his heart was torn from his body, and so he rules the afterlife of Sovereign God, where Nords may die with honor and feast and fight right alongside Shaw in his halls until war comes. Once more, Shaw for the Nords is probably the most aspirational figure, and many fight and die in his memory. In short, yes, the Nords are Paddock, the Needs, and the Siddle. It's worth noting that the term Need encompasses many diverse groups of men, from the Duraki Needs of the Deathlands to the Kaithringi of Black Marsh. It is similar to other broad cultural groupings in history, such as Celtic or Manic Norse, are not Visigoths, who are not Lombards, who are not Saxons, who aren't Franks, but all these people are classified as Germanic. So Need is a broad ethnic, cultural classification that obviously shares some fundamental similarities. And if I was to give you a brief statement, I would say that most of the original Needs were most likely Paddock in belief, but today needed groups are far and few. Between most have been assimilated into other cultures and ethnicities. However, what we call Imperials or Sidel are essentially a Nedic civilization with Nordic admixture and Elven influences. I won't relay the full story here, but the slave, Queen Elysia of the Nyack slave tribes, rises up against the Aids with the help of the Nords, establishes Sidel as a home for their people. Many of the Nyack slaves worship the elven gods of their masters, and the Nords obviously worship their own pantheon. And so we have the alien-made compromise, that is the pantheon of the 8 divines. The imperial cult calls Lan Shazar, and for them, he is positioned as a benevolent creator who showed the other divines the benefits of becoming mothers and fathers to the Preake world, wholly unlike the evil Lan, or the warlike elf-hating Shaw. I would classify them as Paddock, and clearly as their history has proven, the Seidel are some of the most optimistic and forward-thinking cultures, having established multiple empires, each seeking to establish a greatness unachieved by the previous. Tiam, the apotheosis of Tiam Talos, who in their belief is a man who became divine for his greatness, is emblematic of their love for their empire and for their place on. The Richmen are one of my favorite cultures, and I made a video last year presenting some really cool theories that perhaps explain the origins of man on Tamriel and their Drick beliefs similar to the Reachmen of today. But the Richmen worship many Drick entities and have, due to their isolation and remoteness, remained rather true to their roots. They believe in Lan as El, who came to Namir the Spirit Queen and convinced her to make a place within the infinite void for wayward spirits. From the book Great Spirits, Volume 5, rather than a vibrant paradise, El created a hard and painful place, a realm that taught through suffering. While some resent El's cruelty, most praise his wisdom, according to the rich folk. Those who suffer most know best. Hardship is a means to wisdom and glory, and El provided hardship in ample supply. Reply: El supposedly still walks among the mortals of En. He appears only once in a great while, braving the pain and sorrow of the cruel world he created to aid the Reach folk in times of desperate need. My research indicates that the dreaded Bry Heart ritual may have begun as a reflection of that immortal sacrifice, and now it is her scene that they worship the tree avatar of the fierce and terrifying now, who remains supreme in the world of flesh in which they live. So similar to the Richmen think of Lone's world as a test to overcome clearly Paddock. And finally we have the Argonians in interest. Of being brief, the Argonians are overall far more alien compared to most Tamrielic races. Their language bears no concept of past and future, only the present tense, which is philosophically aligned with their position. On Kus, during the early years of Argonian civilization, their Zandir culture were deeply aware of Kus and saw him as a malevolent and destructive force, which they appeased through plation and ritualistic sacrifice. They feared annihilation. In time, the perspective on Kus shifted from a destroyer to a bringer of change, and they accepted that in order for the new to flourish, the old must die. And so the Argonians of today embrace, like the Bosma, the Orbic now, and they do not strive for permanence. Their beliefs include a connection to the Hist, which reinforces their acceptance of change through reincarnation and the ritualistic transformation of gender. They do not seem to have a distinct identity for the missing god figure. But seeing as Lan is traditionally associated with Kus, I would assume their views of him would be similar. I think the Argonians of today would probably be largely pick-embracing creation and the acceptance of Kus and his change as a part of life. Whoops, almost forgot the orcs. Their whole religion isn't necessarily about the exclusion of other gods or anything, but rather about their single patron god, which is Maliki, or at times his preform, Trinimag. There isn't much orcish belief that concerns the missing god, though I would say that the cults of Trinimag probably tend towards the Anuic, and I would guess the cults of Malith tend towards the music pick, of course. The broad mainstream attitudes about the missing god are not the only that exist. What about the tinfoil? Hatters the conspiracy artists? Well, there are those too, and we need to discuss some of their French beliefs regarding the missing god. Figure. And let us begin with the most notorious of the bunch, the Mythic Dawn. The Mythic Dawn, the cult that through their actions shaped Tamriel of the Fourth Era, founded by the enigmatic Menar, Cameron. The Mythic Dawn is a radical faction, dedicated to the worship of the Dry Prince Mion Dion, but more importantly, they have a unique position on the missing god. Land they believe is a Drick Prince, and Mundus they believe is his rightful realm, what we call Adra, the likes of Katha. Mara and Julianos they believe were actually his subordinates, and they betrayed and usurped his rule. That is why the Mythic Dawn devote themselves to Mayans Dion, the vehicle of liberation of freedom, and for them, he will bring about a new dawn, a revolution. All of this revelation is found in the Mysterium. Zarks is written by Mion Dion himself, yet it is the Mythic Dawn commentaries written by Menar Cameron, which can actually be read by the Mythic Dawn members. It is on this book series that the precepts of the cult are based upon. The tidiest little explanation comes from the words of the prophet himself, Menar Cameron. Yes, you understand now. Tamriel is just one more Drick realm of oblivion long since lost to its prince. When he was betrayed by those that served him, Lord Dion cannot invade Tamriel, his birthright. He comes to liberate the occupied lands. Ask yourself, how is it that mighty gods die, yet the D stand incorruptible? How is it that the D forthrightly proclaim themselves to man, while the gods cower behind statues and the faithless words of traitor priests? It is simp people. They are not gods at all. The truth has been in front of you since you first were born. The Dadra are the true gods of this universe. Julianos, Della, and Sta are all Lan's betrayers, posing his divinities in the principality that has lost its guiding light. What are scholarship, love, and mercy when compared to fate, night, and destruction? Gods you worship are trifling shadows of first causes. They have tricked you for ages. Why do you think your world has always been contested, ground the arena of powers and immortals? It is Tamriel, the realm of change, brother to madness, sister to deceit. Your false gods could not entirely rewrite history. Thus, you remember tales of Lan vilified a dead trickster whose heart came to Tamrai. But if a god can die, how does his heart survive? He is Dieth Tamrai. Dieth, this heart is the heart of on the world, for one was made to satisfy the other. You all remember this. It is in every legend. Draw cannot die. so your so-called gods cannot erase him from your minds completely. It is by far one of the most interesting takes on the missing god. And in this universe of myth and unreliable narrator, it is not entirely implausible, but it still remains a fringe theory of cultists. Another seemingly strange, but perhaps important theory is that of the lunar land it contains. Not wild claims about the hidden nature of the world's creator, but instead offers the suggestion that the moons Massa and Sukunda are the missing god's core, the author of the Lunaland Fal Drun, the very same author of the Dragon Break, re-examined, which questions the historical accuracy of the infamous Middle Dawn Dragon Break, says this about the moons. In short, the moons were and are the two halves of Lan's flesh, divinity, like the rest of the gods. Lan was a planet that participated in the Great Construction, except where the 8 lent portions of their heavenly bodies to create the mortal planet's loans was cracked asunder, and his divine spark fell to N as a shooting star to impregnate it with a measure of its existence and a reasonable amount of selfishness. Massa and Sukunda, therefore, are personifications of the dichotomy, the cloven duality. According to Aram, that land legends often rail against ideas of the anima, animus good, evil being nothingness, the poetry of the body, throat and moan, silence as the abortive, and so on set in the night sky, as Lone's constant reminder to his mortal issue of their duty. Followers of this theory told that all other heart stories are mythical degradations of the true origins of the moon, and it needed to be said that they observe the whole crescent theory as well. Feldrun is quite the skeptic, and this proposed theory would run contrary to the ideas of the Bosma and Khajiit, who both regard the moons as the deities Joan and Jod, and further the Kit only associate the dark moon that is hidden behind the actual moons with Laj. Regardless, the lunar land theory is essentially only sourced, as far as I'm aware, from this one book by the researcher Fal Drun, which, keep in mind, is a clever anagram of darn fall. So make of that what you music will. We have now covered all the general ideas that exist about the missing god Lan La, Shasha, Shazar, Sep, and so on. And while these mythological touchstones are substantiated at times by the magical events that occur in the game, such as visiting Snard or reaching the Dark Moon, it only makes it harder to discern a singular root of truth which may not even exist in this mythic universe. However, if we were to analyze something far more concrete, we could instead turn our eyes to the very real, very tangible heart of Lan that lies beneath Red Mountain. This, at the very least, would suggest some truth to the tales of elves and men that speak of Oriel fastening the heart to his bow and firing it into the sea from when Red Mountain would emerge, earning Morrow into the Mona of star-wounded East. The heart of Lan, of course, is most famous for its part in the story of the Elder Scrolls III Morant and the thousands of years of history that precede it you see in the Moric era. Morrowind or Rezon as it was known then, was inhabited mainly by the Kamer and the precursors to the Dunmer race and the DWMA. Yet by the year 240 of the First Era Morrowind was conquered by the First Empire of Nords under the rule of High King Vager, the Gifted for close to 200 years. The Chimer and Dweum were submitted under the Nordic boot, but Skyrim's War of Succession, ignited by the death of High King Borgus, gave the natives of Rizane a golden opportunity. The First Council was formed in an alliance between King Dumek of the Dweima and Lord Indoral Narver of the Kima, and this alliance between former rivals allowed them to liberate themselves from the Nords and secure freedom and prosperity for Rhysand for centuries. However, it was in the depths of their stronghold at Red Mountain that the WMA discovered the heart of Lan, and in their effort to prove themselves greater than the gods whom they regarded as mere oversized spirits, the High Craft, Lord Kogak, attempted to harness the divine energy of the heart as the fundamental component in the creation of the new medium, which was to be their very own mechanical god. Lord Dio of the Ka discovered this heresy and brought it to his lord Nerar, and this is where the quarreling began and what would eventually erupt into the war. Of the First Council, the Battle of Red Mountain is a rather complex event with many suggested series of events and different cultural interpretations, but what we know for truth is told first, that the craft log Kagranak used his tools upon the heart, and at that moment the Duomaean race disappeared forever, and second, that following the battle, the tribunal Alexia Azul would eventually use the heart of Lone and Kagak tools to harness divinity for themselves, thus becoming living gods. The vengeance of Ara, whose oath the tribunal betrayed, is vindicated when the Nareen of the late Third Era fulfills the prophecy, defeats Duth ER, and frees the heart of Lan, and that is essentially the happenings regarding the heart. Lan during recorded history, but as it is said in the myths, this heart is the heart of the world, for one was made to satisfy the other. Mundus is Lan's realm, his trick, his place, and don't believe for a second that he is the idol, bystander. Instead, he may be as his symbols like the fox or the snake, a trickster, a manipulator, the frame maker, the silent director of the play that takes place on the stage of Nur. Let's talk more about it. There is a considerable amount of evidence that suggests Lan's continued influence over the world, at the very least, an indirect fulfillment of his design's purpose. Keep in mind the beliefs of the Richmen and the pre- and post-tribunal Dunar, for they may be the closest to recognizing the truth of this world. In essence, they believe mortality, a challenge, a test for transcendence and enlightenment, via suffering that gives life meaning and fulfillment. Ardor of the Richmen puts their culture's philosophy in this regard quite succinctly. Her scene gives us purpose, teaches us to hunt, to fight, to survive, but it was El who taught us why we should, that no matter the struggle, we should not go quietly into death. We do not fear death, but we understand the value of of a fleeting life. What wonders might we see? What wisdom might we gain? What mark will we leave upon this world? The shrine represents a will to live in spite of the certainty of death, as the real world early. Psychoanalysis. Freud said, "The aim of all life is death." The rich man recognized that the finite, the limitations of mortality create experience, learning, and stories that only become significant in the face of inevitable doom. Life, for them, is beautiful because it ends a stark contrast to the Alma philosophy that regards the loss of immortality as a mournful circumstance. But even among their own kind emerged heretics championed by the prophet Foft. These heretics became the Chimer, who became the Dunmer, and at the root of their belief is the triangled truth, the good draw, aura, mafala, and bia. At face value, one might find these D Prince's spheres to be anything but what is classically described as good. However, when viewed through the lens of good for the spirit, or good for the purpose of life, then it begins to make sense, especially when one considers that the highest good for the Dunmer is the Psijic endeavor, which is the truth of Lan, which is to say, transcendence through suffering. It is helpful to view the grand interplay of Anu and Padam, that is, the mundus, the gray, maybe as a stage for a story, if the protagonist is all he ever wanted. If there was no villain, no struggle to overcome, then what is the purpose? The purpose of life is the story, and without struggle or growth, there is no tale to tell, and as the spirits once were in the light of Anu, infinite and everlasting. There was no change. You may have heard before that limitation breeds creativity. When one has limited tools, limited resources, limited time, even one has to rely on creativity in order to thrive or produce things of beauty, whether that be an artist that only has 3 colors in a canvas, a director who only has 9 actors in a budget of $1, zero, or whether it is a primitive human who figures out how to kill an animal at a distance with a stick and a sharp rock, when the At-Ada, the original spirits, were trapped within the stage of Mundus, cut from the limitless light, Atheris. Then they had to be creative, in the sense they had to literally create Ifi, and many of the other El had to use their very own essence to become the earth bones, to become the natural laws of the world, in order for others to have a place. The other El, both old and wandering, had to devise new ways of creation as their limitless magics dwindled, and in that time they were limited to procreation, only able to reproduce children and create through guidance. You see where I'm going with all of this. In short, limitations do not only breed creativity, they are essential for creativity to exist as a concept in the limitlessness of Anu. There is no creation, there simply is existence. It just is. Whereas in spaces where nullification lingers, where limitations impose absence, only then can something create. Only then can something be creative. You could even get very, very meta and think about how Lon creates the stage, aka Mundus, aka the actual Elder Scrolls game that you, the player, can be creative in and roleplay and experience your own story. Ultimately, this, I believe, was Lan's mission, but of course he did not simply die. He lives in a way he lives. As long as Mundus lives, they are intrinsically connected. But let's explore the lasting impacts of Lon upon the world. And perhaps, let us look at how he manifests and adheres to his own confines of limitation. Let me introduce you to the concept of the Shezarene, one of the missing gods. Many names is Shazar, the name given by the Silic. In concept, a Shezarene is an avatar of Shazar. They are aspects, incarnations, bound by the limits of this world, the essence of a god in mortal form. In several myths of Tamal's cultures, this phenomenon is described in some way in enriched belief. El, as he is known, supposedly still walks among the mortals of Nur. They say he only appears once in a great while, braving the form, pain and sorrow of the cruel world he created in order to aid the rich folk in times of desperate need in Euron belief. Sep, their version of the missing god, is killed by Tall Papa, which is their version of Oriel, and it is said that a hunger fell from Sep's dead mouth, and that was all that was left of him. This hunger can be interpreted as his heart, aka the heart of Lon. And in this state, Sep, as they call him, could only, quote, slink around in a dead skin. And this can be understood to mean that the heart's influence allows him to manifest on in mortal forms, as Shireen in Khajiit mythology. The gods tore out Lash's heart and hid it deep within the world, cursing him to walk Nur for many phases. That is to say that Lan would manifest and walk among mortals, unknown. The direct quote is actually, "We curse you, noisy lage, to walk neary for many phases," which I want to draw attention to because it calls him noisy. Another name for Lan is the doom drum, the beating heart of the world, and he is often associated with sound, as is the very fabric of the universe. The Thor sword, singing tonal architecture and the like in Nordic legend. Shaw's ghost was sung back into existence so that he could defeat the ghost of Aldwin, and most notably in the songs of Penal and the myths that surround him. We get the term itself, Shezarene, in Volume 5 of the Songs of Penal. It says it is a solid truth that Mora House was the son of Ken, but whether or not Pelinel was indeed the Shezarene is best left unsaid. For once, Plon, who favored the short sword, said it, and that night he was smothered by moths. It is famous, though, that the two talked of each other as family, with Mora House as the lesser, and that Pelena loved him and called him nephew. But these could be merely the fancies of immortals. The death of Plon seems to be a little suspect, killed the night he claimed. Pinol was Shireen in addition in Nordic mythology. Kay is the wife of Shaw. If Mora House is the son of Kay, then perhaps Shaw is envisioned as the father. Not that this is necessarily how it works for gods and all that, but perhaps with Pinol as a Shezarene, as an incarnation of Shah is seen as like a brother of Shah, which would make him Mora. House's uncle contrived god genealogy. Aside, there is more that pins the legendary Pelin Wit Strike as a Shireen in Volume 1. It said he was called Pelinal III, which some say was so because he was a god geyser who had incarnated twice before all already. And another source, before the ages of man, says, during the late Maic era, the legendary immortal hero, warrior sorcerer, and king, variously known as Pelin, Wit Strike Herald, Harry Breaks, Ismir Hans, the Fox, etc., wandered Tamriel gathering armies, conquering lands, ruling, then abandoning his kingdoms to wander again. And in Volume 6 of the Songs of Pinol, it says, and it is said that he emerged into the world like a paddock that is borne by cuss, and all the forces of change therein. Still others, like Fifth of New Teed, say that beneath the Pelinal star armor was a chest that gaped open to show no heart, only a red rage-shaped diamond, fashion singing like a mindless dragon, and that this was proof that he was a myth, echo, and that where he trod were shapes of the first urging Pinol, a paddock borne by cuss, sounds like Lan, and beneath his armor was a gaping chest, aka no heart, like Lan, and in the space was a red rage-shaped diamond fashion, which almost sounds like the Kim El Adabal, which is the amulet of kings, which itself was supposedly made from the divine drop of blood from Lone's heart as it was shot. Across the sky at convention, I firmly believe in the Shezarene concept, and that Pelin Wyke was indeed such an incarnation, and this aligns with the many myths of other cultures regarding aspects of Lan that still walk the earth among mortals. Interestingly, the Khajiit have a name for Pinol that is the white snake in their tails. Alkosh defended them from his rampant slaughter during his madness, and that name reminds me of the Udon faith that believes Sept the Serpent can only slink around in dead skins. So Lan set the stage of Mundus, yet he also takes part in it, willingly or unwillingly, depending on the source, and his direction has inspired many to shape the world of the Draboya, seems to champion La most, he who punished Trinimac for calling the narratives of the missing god into question, she who said, "We pledge ourselves to you, the Fra, Maker, the Scarab, a world for us to love you, in a cloak of dirt to cherish betrayed by your ancestors when you were not even looking," a statement that somewhat aligns with the mythic Dawn's view of Lan as betrayed by the Adra. That said, it's no wonder then that Boya showed Veloth the Sigic endeavor, and a whole race of elves left Somerset devoted to Lan's truth of their kind. One among them, if all is to be believed, found a path to transcendence and completed the Sigic endeavor in some capacity. That individual would be the tribunal, God VC, the warrior poet, but his story is long and contrived, filled with doubt and dogma, I do not wish to speak deeply of abstract concepts such as Kim and concepts like Coda beyond it, but if you are interested, I'll link the VC Explained video in the description, while the Donma Aras erase a love letter to Land's vision, a eulogy written in blood and flesh. There may be no need for such a headstone, because rebirth could be on the horizon, or perhaps already has. Music occurred. It's time to talk about Talls. Talos is all we hear about in Skyrim to the Imperial cult. He is, or rather, was the ninth divine, a mortal man, a hero from Aetur who came and united all of Tamriel under a single empire, a dragon-born emperor, to build a new dynasty, and for his greatness in life, he ascended to godhood preachers such as Ire and even Maynard Cameron in the Mythic Dawn commentaries. Both claim that he achieved Kim a state of awakening and enlightenment that allows one great power shown by Seidl's transformation from a jungle, tropical river society to a fertile land of fields and woods retroactively. That is, if you believe those tales. There also exists the Arcturian heresy in the events of Dapur, which support a different tale, not a story enjoyed by priests, most devout. In essence, the Arcturian heresy attributes conspiracy and murder to Tyr's septum, and speaks of his many legendary feats, as in fact attributed to 3 individuals. The heresy says that Holti Earlybeard, the true name of Typon, was born on the Isle of Aer and Hyrg, and that all his feats of legends and thorn were not solely his own, but in fact the work of 3 people himself: the Ash King Ymir Wolar, the ancient Nordic king, also named the Grey Wind, who had been called from death many times, and Zurin Arctis, the imperial battle mage. There are rather complex, sometimes contrived theories that essentially come to the conclusion that Holti, Earlybeard, Ismir, Wolar, and Zurin Arctis were all Sharn, which is to say, each of those individuals were aspects of Lan, and through the events of the Octarian heresy and subsequently the events of the Elder Scrolls to Dagger, and those 3 individuals, through several metaphysical processes involving the Numidium and the Mantella, end up forming the Oversoul that is called Talos. Lots of this theorizing is based on outside canon works and statements, as well as community assumptions which color how we interpret in canon information. So, all of this should be taken with a grain of salt. And if you do want more information on the specifics, we do have a video regarding Talls, but regardless of the complexities of establishing the initial evidence for such obscure and hardly mentioned concepts, such as what constitutes a Shezarene thematically, the ideas here are interesting to discuss. If we take a leap of faith and accept at face value the premise that Zurin, Holti, and Ismi are all Shireen, that they are aspects or incarnations of Lan forced to walk the earth, well then, if you combine those three aspects into an oversoul, perhaps you would get a whole new god, a Talos, built from the disparate aspects of Lan, which kind of makes him a Lan 2.0 remix. Talos is emblematic of the Third Empire, the will of man. You could say a living god, unlike the Shar or Lan that is dead. So to say, the idea is that Talos is the divine rebirth of Lan's ideal and Over's soul, made from the unification of several Charon into one super, which is why the elves, the Thalor, oppose him so greatly. He is, idealistically, their opposite. If this were all true, then Talos for them could be equated to the emergence of an Antichrist, the devil reborn for, in their belief. That is essentially what Lan is to them. I realize I haven't gone into depth with the evidence for this theory, and the reason I haven't is because it's very hard to determine who or what to believe, and whether or not to consider outside canon sources, and the groundwork is a little contrived in my opinion. We are dealing with Daggerfall error law, and then that law transitions through Tomorrowwind, which came up with the concepts of dragon breaks to deal with Daggerfall's multiple endings, plus added many new concepts. And then we have many games later, where Dragonborn retroactively is attributed the powers of Dragon Soul, Sucking, and Super Thor. When the Aruan heresy was written, Dragonborn did not even mean the same thing. There are many reasons to take this theory with a grain of salt, but thematically, I find it very interesting. Perhaps one day I'll make a proper detailed video explaining everything about this concept, but that could take a lot longer than this video already is. Plus, I like to keep to first principles type of thinking about Elder Scrolls, and I enjoy all the different interpretations that come from that. At the end of the day, the missing god of the Elder Scroll, whatever name he may go by, is most certainly the most significant entity of all. He is the centerpiece which determines the cosmic play, that is, the Mandus. He is the catalyst for creation, yet also the quiet hand that nudges the plot of the world. I hope that by the end of this video, you have all the foundational understanding of Lan's most important concepts and the various beliefs that surround him. Perhaps with this video, you will be able to craft your own theories and build conclusions of what it all means. There are concepts such as Amaranth and the New Man, which have much to do with Michael Kirkbride's mind-child, Coda, which gives a narrative conclusion to Munda's, and personally, I really enjoy that, but it's not exactly part of the canon intellectual property that is the Elder Scrolls, and going forth things might change direction. I'd urge you to investigate that and see if you like it. But that said, thank you all so much for watching. I hope this has been helpful. And should you be seeking to make fresh converts among your friends and introduce them to the Elder Scrolls law, I would say recommend this video, among others, to help give a foundational understanding of the Elder Scrolls' most important figure. Thanks again, like the video, subscribe for more. My name is Scott, and I'll be back to nerd out with you again next time. Music.
Nixono Sound Studio.